Very, very happy to see you again, and welcome if this is your first time in the Rescogita's podcast channel. Rescogita, the ecological startup that aims to have an impact on individuals, on society, and on the biosphere. So remember to follow us on www.rescogita.academy. Now, sit back, relax, enjoy.
My name is Lorenzo Nava, and I'm speaking on behalf of Rescogita. And today, we're going to listen to the final podcast that introduces the grounds upon which ecopsychology is built. That is, collective and historical trauma. Let's start with what is a trauma? A trauma is a damage to the mind that is the result of a distressing event or more that generate unmanageable levels of stress that go beyond the ability to cope with it or digesting and integrating the emotions around, and can well lead to very negative consequences. And then we have historical trauma, which is the emotional experience of a group, generation, even individuals, that result from a specific event which is caused by traumatic experience and is manifested from emotions and actions that result from this trauma. There are many ways how historical trauma reflects on individual behavior. For example, drugs or alcohol abuse, with the purpose to reduce the pain, self-destruction, suicidal thoughts and actions, depression, anxiety, anger, violence, blocks in expressing emotions, abuse, all stem from unresolved grief, which perpetuates the trauma. This is the outcome of witnessing and surviving war, famine, genocide, and continues even generations after that. This is something extensively studied, especially in the field of social psychology, identifying in groups same or similar symptoms, just as individual trauma shared by groups of people collectively, though in different extents. Two examples which were really deeply studied was the presence of collective or historical trauma in the indigenous people who were subjugated and exterminated through colonialism or slave trade, and how this still perpetuates to this day. It's still there. The other one big example which was very much studied was the Holocaust, and its psychological aftermath is still felt by the groups and cultures that were mostly hit. Take the Jews or Roma and Sinti people. This data comes from case studies analysis concerning symptoms of trauma shockingly high among the cultures suffering from historical trauma as compared to the others. Now, the question is, are there historical traumas that have affected the whole of humanity? Definitely, though difficult to recognize it. It is possible to date back in recent history some traumatic experience which definitely were not as impactful and savage as the Holocaust may have been, and yet left its mark on the human mind. Recently, for work, I checked out a survey across European youth, and two unprecedented elements came up. The first being that for the first time, youth perceived that mental health, along with environmental concerns, should be the priority of policymakers in the youth field. And the second being, though with a slim margin, the majority of young people have a negative and pessimistic outlook to the future. This we can perceive as symptoms of a collective trauma, which shows itself as distress, widespread anxiety, increased cases of depression among young people, up to naming mental illness the plague of the 21st century. While the support and mental health professions are equipped to deal with the symptoms of this trauma, and ill-equipped to deal with the root and the cause of the illness, the disease perpetuates, as the cure is temporary and does not tackle its virality and spread, to use a 2020 metaphor. An interesting manifestation is culture, Check out how many blockbuster series, movies, and novels out there are increasingly showing dystopian negative futures where humanity is doomed and the environment crisis gets worse, causing massive disasters or leading to look for life on another planet, or tyrannical societies led by mad ideologies. These blockbusters are symptoms of historical trauma and part of the virality of showing a hopeless and meaningless future, which promotes sadness, lack of action, depression, and different levels of anxiety. Ecopsychology proposes to work on the causes of the illness rather than just treat its symptoms through only therapy and conventional medicine, and proposes itself to be an added value, by all means not a replacement. By building healthy relationship with the community, with the biosphere, and build or restore an alliance with the acknowledgement that all is interconnected, by promoting a view of that well-being of the one and of the whole are deeply connected and dependent. So let's have a look at those impactful events that could have led towards the historical trauma many today are suffering across humanity. The root, surprise, surprise, can be identified mostly in Western culture. And as its models of economy, politics, education, society, and so on spread globally, it started to affect and on the long term afflict the rest of the globe. So, let's take the first potential trauma, and some might come as a surprise to you. First of all, the Renaissance. Now, the Renaissance was not just a cradle for the arts and rediscovery of beauty and boost of scientific research. It was also one of the most violent times in history. That, combined with the establishment of the individual as a single figure with huge potential for self-realization, deserving to be liberated from the superstitions and backwardness promoted by religion in those times. And it was then that scholars and thinkers, in their wish to free humanity from the yoke of religious leadership, questioned and attacked spirituality and the deity itself. So while they were successful in removing the bigotry and medieval approach to life heralded by religion in those days, the side effect was to gradually remove spirituality and God as a whole, leaving people orphaned of a spiritual purpose for the sake of reason and logic. So here it must be said that 95% of what we know and have today is thanks to those who questioned the moral leadership back then, advancing science and knowledge to unprecedented levels as we have today. However, despite that, we lost a 5%. And that was a form of spirituality. And a perfect clock does not work should a small wheel be removed. Therefore, that could be the first historical trauma we faced, the main casualty of the advent of the scientific age, God, or otherwise known as spirituality. The second trauma. As the sciences advanced, so did physics and astronomy, which brought about some shocking news for those times, besides that Earth is not flat. Nobody believes that today, right? And most importantly, that we are far from being in the center of the universe. Far from it. Just a small rock floating in the emptiness of the cosmos, at the mercy of stars and asteroids. We take it for granted now. However, if you look at it in perspective, how much of a shock that is. We are not as important as we thought we were, accompanied by an increased understanding of the supremacy of individualism and self-realization versus collective forms of society. The third trauma came shortly after a long, passionate love affair with science, fast advancements in every field, pluralistic politics, slowly taking over, and the absolutist medieval monarchies, striving for rights and humanism, and bam! Here comes evolution theory. as what today is taken pretty much for granted. Humanity comes to discover that we are actually just animals, and the rules of nature apply to us just as they apply to mice or giraffes, and that our roots come from monkeys. As if that wasn't enough, our existence as a species and life on this planet is just the result of lucky coincidences from the Big Bang to today. No design, no predestination, just a mass of cells and atoms that by chance happen to come to life and evolve. Imagine how shocking that must have been. And it is not by accident that the time of the discovery of evolution also brought about in literature and culture elements like cosmic pessimism, existentialism, and so on. The fourth trauma happened almost at the same time: psychology. All our emotions, all that we feel, how we behave, love, live, decide, is actually part of a mechanism with a clear scientific explanation. Although psychology evolved greatly since those days, as did studies of the mind, it must have been quite a thing to find out that rationality and logic invaded also the sphere of emotions, free will, and belief. The fifth trauma, World War I. Not just the destruction and senseless genocide it brought about, like never before in history, as empires committed suicide, destroying their own young generations against one another, with such mechanical and systemic violence. The technological advancements brought about by the war, an extent of death and destruction, kind of led towards the disenchantment with science and scientists. The love affair was over, and somehow there came a realization that this knowledge is also able to bring great harm and not only progress. The sixth trauma is embedded between World War II and the Cold War. In our understanding and rationality, the World War II made much more sense than World War I, as it was a clash between systems to bring about the end of fascism and totalitarianism. However, it also brought about an understanding of what horrors the rational humans are capable of, despite the cold and logic mind, to bring about systemic extermination of fellow humans in such a monstrous and mechanic ways as seen in the concentration camps across Europe and Asia. An understanding that actually anybody is able to carry out such monstrosity. It is not a national nor a cultural feature, but a human one. Realizing what any one of us could actually be capable of doing. World War II ended with 2 nuclear bombs dropped over 2 cities which disappeared within seconds, and radiations wiped out many of the few survivors. Indeed, another historical trauma, especially because the threat and fear of the bomb is what loomed over humanity for the next half a century, knowing that the threat loomed and that this threat would mean an end to life on Earth. And it was a very tangible possibility, which could happen at any time. Such life in constant fear is bound to leave a psychological mark. So all of these 6 traumas above teach us a lot about how we are dealing with our present existential threat to life and to our existence as a species, the environmental and climate crisis, which threaten all of humanity and the natural world. However, past traumas have taught many of us how powerless and meaningless we are, how deep inside we are ashamed and guilty about what we've been capable of doing, and as Rorschach puts it, a deep sense of grief accompanying us for what we have lost in the past centuries and what we're losing today, and how powerless and demotivated we feel as we passively live through this threat to life. Ecopsychology proposes a solution to acknowledge and heal that grief, where the mental illness of today has its roots. The major symptom of our stockpiled traumas by bringing about a sense of community and purpose through unity, as this specific threat concerns everyone, regardless of national borders, as well as the modern human world. And to re-establish connection and ties within communities and with the environment by identifying that others and nature are full part of our identity. Therefore, purpose. Therefore, responsibility. We hope we have given you enough food for thought for the coming days, and very much looking forward to starting together with you with the next series on Carl Jung. Now remember to follow us on www.rescogita.academy for more articles, updates and offers. And now, please take very good care of yourselves, wherever you are. Goodbye.